Hello everyone, it's Channin here with Waffle Flower Crafts. In today's video, I'm going to show you how to create your own color mixing chart using our color swatches combo. This is the color swatches combo set. I'm going to use the included stamp set to create a 36 swatch grid, which I will use as a color mixing chart for these 6 distress ink colors. Also included in the color swatches combo is this handy reference guide and the matching color swatches die set in the back. The reference guide identifies and labels all the dies included in the set, as well as outlines the size of paper needed to create a plethora of different sized grids. For example, I'm creating a 36 grid chart. The guide indicates that I can use a standard A2 panel, which is 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 if I prefer. Many card makers have their watercolor paper pre-cut to this size, so this is a helpful option. The guide even has a diagram illustrating how to use either the spacer A or spacer B to help position the stamp in my MISTI. I've already die cut an A and B spacer out of some heavyweight cardstock. I store these spacers in the cloud storage bag with the dies so they are readily available when I need them, and I don't have to die cut them every time I'm creating grids. I'm going to use a MISTI to stamp my color mixing chart, so I have it here on my work surface along with an A2 panel of watercolor paper. First, I'll just nestle the panel down into the lower right corner of the MISTI, and I'll use the 2 magnets to hold it in place. I'll then grab the spacers and straighten them out just a bit with my fingers. I can use either spacer A or B to help me position the grid stamp. When using spacer B, simply nestle the spacer in the lower right corner, making sure to align the wider side of the spacer with the 5 1/2 inch side of the panel. Today I'll be using spacer A. To use the spacer, simply nestle it into the right corner. Since both sides of the spacer are the same thickness, it doesn't matter which side goes where. After your spacer is in place, then align the grid stamp up to the spacer. Do this simply by sliding the stamp over till it's nestled against the spacer. Once in place, then fold your MISTI over to pick up the stamp. The spacer helps you position your stamp to create a consistent 3/16 inch of a border around the grid of swatches. Now I will ink up the stamp with a waterproof ink. I'm using VersaFine Onyx Black ink. Once it's well inked, I'll then fold my MISTI over and then stamp. Of course, I'm not done yet. Right now I only have a 24 swatch grid. I need to stamp 2 more 6 grid columns to finish my chart. But first, I need to thoroughly clean the stamp. First, I'll wipe it down with a damp chamois. Then I will stamp it several times on some scrap paper to make sure it's not only clean, but also dry. With my stamp all clean, I can now remove it from the MISTI and then reposition it over the panel to complete the chart. To position the stamp, I look through and to the side of the stamp to make sure the rows and columns are in alignment and the gap between the 2 grids is the same, so the whole chart is cohesive. Once the stamp is in the right place, I will then fold my MISTI over to pick it up. Since I only want to stamp 2 of these columns, I will need a mask. For my mask, I am using a sheet of copy paper cut down to 3 1/2 inches and then folded in half. I will now position the mask over the panel so it lines up directly with the 2 columns I don't want to stamp. Again, I look through the stamp to help me position the mask. I also use the grid lines on the MISTI to help me as well. Once in place, I will hold it down with the magnet and then ink up the stamp and then stamp. The mask protects the panel, so even though I inked up a bit of that 3rd column, none of the ink got onto the panel. I do, however, have to ink up the stamp and stamp it again because I didn't notice the bar magnet was elevated because it was on the frame of the MISTI. This prevented the stamp from completely reaching the paper. Once I realized, I just adjusted the magnet and then stamped again. And now we have our 36 color mixing chart ready for paint. Because I chose an A2 panel, I have a 3/4 inch border on the left side, which I will use to label my colors. But if you don't want this border, simply use a 5 1/2 by 4 inch panel instead, which is indicated on the reference guide. And now it's time to paint. As I mentioned earlier, I'm using distress inks today, so in addition to a towel and a paintbrush, I also have a spray bottle, a cup of water to clean out my brush, and a sheet of plastic which I will use as a palette. I chose these 6 colors with the primary colors in mind, so I have 2 yellows, 1 cool, 1 warm, 2 reds, 1 cool, 1 warm, and 2 blues, 1 cool, 1 warm. For my cools, I have squeezed lemon, picked raspberry, and mermaid lagoon, and for my warms, I have mustard seed, barn door, and blue print sketch. I have arranged the inks in the order I want to paint them, and the first thing I need to do is paint the Masstone for each color along the diagonal of the chart, starting at the upper left and ending at the bottom right. To get the ink out of the pad, I'll just press it against the palette. I'll then spray some water onto my palette, which I will grab from with my brush to add small amounts of water to the ink, making the ink more liquidy and more paintable. I will then paint the first swatch. I will repeat this process, making my way down the diagonal for each new Distress ink color. With my Masstones completed, I am now ready to start mixing my colors. I'm going to start with Squeeze Lemon. First, I'll count the unpainted swatches below. There are 5 spaces, one for each of the remaining Distress inks. Because there are 5, I will press Squeeze Lemon in 5 places on my palette. I'll then press one of the Distress inks next to the area of Squeeze Lemon while trying to create about a 1-to-1 ratio of the 2 colors. I'll then grab my paintbrush, dip it in the water, and then mix the 2 colors together. Once they're the right consistency, I'll paint the first swatch underneath the Squeeze Lemon. Now you might have realized that this chart will cause us to paint 2 swatches with this Squeeze Lemon and Mustard Seed color. This is because these 2 colors intersect twice on this chart. To avoid that redundancy, we will now dilute this new color with a small amount of water and then paint it to the right of the Squeeze Lemon swatch. Now we have a reference for how this new color looks when diluted. Now I'll clean my brush and move on to the next 2 inks, Squeeze Lemon and Barn Door. First I'll mix them up with a small amount of water from my palette and then paint the next swatch in the Squeeze Lemon column. Then I dilute this new color and paint the next swatch in the Squeeze Lemon row. I will repeat this whole process for the remaining combinations of ink and complete the entire row and column for the Squeeze Lemon. So you may be wondering why I chose to work with Distress inks today. Well, I frequently watercolor with these inks. I like how vibrant and transparent they are. But I had never really tried color mixing with them before, so I was really curious how the inks would behave and what new colors I might discover. I chose to try a split primary palette for mixing, which is why I chose a warm and cool shade of the 3 primary colors, red, yellow, and blue. Typically with watercolors, a split primary palette will yield more vibrant colors, and it is easier to mix a full spectrum of colors with this palette. So I was curious if this would be true for Distress inks as well. I just finished the Squeeze Lemon row and column and now moving on to Mustard Seed. Just like before, I counted the number of unpainted swatches below the Masstone. There were 4, so I created 4 areas of Mustard Seed on my palette and then smushed the remaining Distress inks adjacent. As I work my way through the chart, I'll have fewer and fewer combos to mix up each time. I'll now just continue to fill out my color mixing chart, and I'll meet you back when I'm just about done. So I'm back. I'm just about done with my color mixing chart. I'm just finishing up this last swatch here with the diluted Mermaid Lagoon and Blueprint sketch. Now I'll just label my X and Y axis with my ink colors and it'll be all done. I went ahead and labeled my inks off camera. As you can see, I wrote the full name along the left side, but just wrote the initials at the top. I'm so amazed by all the colors I was able to create with these 6 colors. I got some really lovely oranges, greens, and purples. I did get a couple muddy colors, but for the most part, I'm really happy with the results. I was also surprised how easy it was to mix the inks. I thought it was going to be very difficult to get a 1-to-1 ratio using the ink pads, but in the end, I think it might have actually been easier than using re-inkers, which I thought was going to be the better option going into this. Overall, this was an excellent exercise in color mixing, and I learned a lot about how the inks mix together, and now I have this handy reference for when I watercolor. I hope you enjoyed today's video and found it helpful. If you want any more info on the products I use, please visit waffleflower.com, and you can follow us on YouTube, Instagram, and Facebook for more info on swatching using all of our swatch sets. Thanks for watching and have a wonderful day.